All right, I want to welcome Stephanie to the show. I have known Stephanie for just almost a year, I think.
Yeah.
And I keep following her feed, and she has such amazing information about supporting students with special education and complex needs in classrooms and in schools. And I was super excited to talk with her. So, hi, Stephanie. Thanks for joining
Hi.
us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Stephanie DeLussey. I am the teacher, author, whatever we're calling it these days, behind Mrs. D's Corner. And I also run a website called The Intentional IEP. I work in the United States. So I've worked in 5 different states, and I've been certified as a teacher in 7 currently. And I think I've worked in like 7 different schools, public and charter schools. So I've kind of touched on everything from K to 12, and I've done extended school year and all of that fun stuff. So been around.
That's a lot. 7 different states.
Yeah, we
That's
move a lot.
Oh, that's okay though.
Yeah.
And you're in Florida
We're,
now, right?
we're currently in Florida now, and hopefully this is it. Like, this is where we've wanted to be for a really long time. So hopefully this is it.
Perfect. So, most of my audience are regular classroom teachers that are
Mhm.
teaching grades 3, grade 4, grade 5, or even grade 6. And many of them will have students that require complex needs. They have students with a variety of special education needs, and they're all integrated into the regular classroom. And sometimes it's difficult to juggle the needs and demands of students with complex needs in a regular classroom while you're also trying to cover curriculum expectations and teach grade level content. So, from your perspective, what is something that a regular classroom teacher should know about teaching students with complex needs?
So there's a couple of different things. So the first thing is what works for one student might not work for another student. So if you have an autistic student who, let's say, this certain accommodation works for this child, and you have another autistic student, that accommodation might not work for that child. So my biggest recommendation is to read the child's IEP, which is their individualized education program. And we talked a little bit before this that y'all's are written a little bit differently than how they are in the States, but essentially everything is the same. Like, all of the information is the same. It just might be titled differently. So what you'll want to do is, I'm just going to give you a really quick, and if you're watching the video, you'll be able to see it. So if you're listening on the podcast, maybe go check out the video, because I'm going to show. I just pulled an IEP from some county in Florida. It's blank, so there's no like confidentiality anywhere, anything about that. But the first place that you want to look, if you're wondering what to do with a student who has an IEP, is you're going to want to look first at the annual goals. Because so if you're teaching them English, look at the English IEP goals. If you're teaching them math, look at the math IEP goals. What skills are they working on that you need to be aware of, that you can help collect data on, which we'll get to later. And then you also want to look at, and this is called something different, even in the United States, state to state, it's labeled differently in every state. In this one, it's called the provision of specialized services. So basically it's the service page. So what special education services are they getting, and what are their minutes? So let's say they're in your class for English. They're supposed to be getting 45 minutes, and that's how it's written, 45 minutes of English instruction, and it tells you who it's provided by. They also have related services. So you have like OT, which is occupational therapy, PT, physical therapy, speech language pathology, all of those things. It'll also list out accommodations and modifications, which are very important. So you'll want to look at those as well. And then supports for school personnel. So in the IEP meeting, let's say you're the English teacher for this child that has an IEP, and you use a specific English curriculum or a specific reading curriculum. You can have it written into the IEP that whoever is teaching this child for English gets training on that program and how to use that program. So that'll also be in the IEP. And then you have supplementary aids and services, which is, just want to make sure that you read all of that and you know what it means. If you don't know what it means, please ask somebody, ask the special education teacher, because we're here to help you.
Yeah, I think the special education teacher is definitely going to be your friend in this circumstance because we have either alerts or certs or whatever acronym they're being referred to across the board, but they're there and they have probably worked with this student for a couple of years now, so they might have some insight. So I think you're totally right there. Yeah, looking at that IEP is definitely going to be, I think, your first step, and to see what's worked in the past, what is going to work in the future, just to kind of get your mind right about like what
Yeah.
could work with that student for sure. So if you have your student and you've covered their IEP and now
Mm-hmm.
you're ready to teach them like English, many teachers will probably be the same teacher for English, math, science, and social studies. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're looking at having that teacher, now you have to balance as that teacher between how do you meet this student's needs and how do you meet the needs of your other students that are also in your class. So how do you strike that right balance if it's
um,
possible?
and y'all are gonna be like, I'm done. But I think there's not one right or wrong way to do it. I think it really depends on you as a teacher, how comfortable you feel with doing certain things, how stretched thin you currently are, and the needs of your classroom, the needs of all of your students, including those with and without IEPs, and then also especially those with IEPs. What things are you supposed to be providing to those students in your classroom? It really depends. And again, I'm going to say, if you're struggling with this and not sure what to do or what something means or how to provide this accommodation or modification, ask the special education teacher, because they're going to be the person that's there to help you. Like if you have to make modifications to a reading passage, let's say, if you have to modify a fifth grade reading passage to be on a second grade reading level, you're going to want to reach out to the special education teacher so that y'all can do it either together or figure out a game plan moving forward, how to make sure that the reading passages are presented at the grade level for the student, what the student's working on.
Yeah, I think the differentiating and using, I think, assistive technology whenever you have it too is going to help out with that as well. So for some of the experiences that I have had in my classroom is I've had a student with complex needs. They were working well below grade level and were diagnosed with autism and could work about, say, 5-10 minutes at a task that was very, very simple and
Mm-hmm.
basic. So if you were presented, if I was coming to you as my special education teacher going, oh, okay, so he's reading at a grade 2 level and
Mm-hmm.
his attention span is like 5 minutes of a task and he doesn't really want to have anything to do with anybody else in our class. What would you say, help recommend for me?
Oh gosh, there's so many different things that you could do. So you could do like a first then board, which is basically a visual schedule, and you use icons to say first, and then there's a picture of whatever they're working on. If they need less support, so you could even just write it. Like if you have a written schedule, depends on the student again. You could say, first, we're gonna read this passage, then you get this. And there's also first, next, then board. So first we're gonna read the passage, then you're gonna answer questions, then you get this. And whatever they're working for is something they prefer. So you want
Oh,
it to be a
okay.
preferred activity. You can do that. Visual schedules, again, are really, really great because it shows them the succession of what they're going to be working on and what comes next so that they can plan in their mind and they're not surprised. You can also do frequent breaks, which are really helpful. Use different types of timers. You have like timers that beep, you have the sand timers, things like that. And you can also do like a preference assessment to see what the student likes the most and reward them that way for completing their work. So as you would start out, so say this student can only work for 5 minutes, probably somewhere in the IEP, one of their IEP goals is to work for maybe 10 minutes, and that's what we're working up to. So you'll start with the 5 minutes, and then once they're really good at working for 5 minutes, then maybe you'll increase it to 5.5 minutes or maybe 6 minutes. and then they'll get a reward. And then they'll do 6 more minutes of work and then get a reward until you get up to that 10-minute increment. So it really just depends again on the student and what's in their IEP.
Yeah, and I think knowing them and knowing kind of their baseline as to where they are currently is going to help with that, and maybe not doing too much. So not having like, I want you to do all of the science and all of the math and all of the social studies and overwhelming. Because if we're teaching everything, and then we
It
can't,
is overwhelming.
it's hard to have a goal for absolutely everything.
Yes. So break it down into smaller chunks of work too is really helpful. And you can even ask parents, like, we're trying to do this here at school. What is working at home that maybe we can try here? What is something that you do when, say, we want him to brush his teeth for 2 minutes and he only wants to brush his teeth for a minute? How do you get him to brush his teeth for 2 minutes? What is working for you? And then maybe you can somehow use that in the classroom.
Yeah, I think parents, they're the experts on their kids most of the time. So I think bringing them into the discussion is going to be beneficial all of the time.
Yes.
So some of the other, I mean, I love this. I love the idea of like presenting you with different like scenarios that are so common in classrooms to just like hear some of the strategies. Cause like you're the expert here when it comes to, you've probably worked with so many different kids and seen all of the different variation of things that work. So another type of student that we might get are someone that has really intense like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, where they have a really difficult time concentrating and focusing, and they are capable of doing the work, especially when we look at their learning profiles. There may be some learning disabilities there in place, but we know that cognitively they can think and function at grade level. It's just there's that barrier that's getting in their way. So what are some of these systems and things that you can put into place that can help the student who might be struggling with inattention and some hyperactivity to help them get and access some of those, higher level thinking skills so that they can really be able to get the grade level work done because they're capable of it. We've just got this big block kind of in their way. So what are some strategies that would work perhaps in that sort of situation?
Yeah, so the first thing, I mean, you certainly can do like the first then boards, the visual schedules, and have those types of things, frequent breaks, things like that to allow them that time. But also, fidgets are really great for sensory input. So, whether that's like a piece of Velcro under their desk that they can touch while they're working. So, maybe they're writing with one hand and they're like fidgeting with something in their other hand to kind of do both at the same time, get that hyperactivity out while they're still working. You have so many different options when it comes to sensory input. So many different fidgets. I mean, I could go on for hours about that. But you can also do flexible seating. So if they're sitting and you find that they're like bouncing around or they're constantly like getting up out of their chair, is there a way that they can stand and do their work? Do you have a standing desk? Is there a way to do that? Can they work on a clipboard? Can they sit on the floor and work on a clipboard? Maybe use a yoga ball or one of those like they're not, I don't know what they're called, but they're like the exercise bands and you tie it around the feet of the chair so that they can like bounce their feet on it. You have that option. I mean, there's even desks now. I know they're really expensive, but they have like the seats have like bicycle pedals on them so they can sit and like pedal at the same time. So you have lots of different options for when it comes to that, but definitely you want to get down to like what is the cause of the hyperactivity in this specific situation. And you want to make sure that they're not trying, like it's not a behavior, they're not trying to escape the work, they're not trying to get away from doing it or anything like that, that it's actually, the ADHD, and then you can put in some accommodations in place to help the student get the work completed.
And I think we also have to challenge, like with all of those things that you were mentioning, which are fantastic ideas. I think it helps for teachers that have the conception that a good class is a quiet class that sits in their desk and does their work. That if the expectation is that a student or success in your classroom is a student that is sitting nicely and quietly at their desk and working away, that's going to limit some of the options for our students, because just because you had somebody standing or you have somebody pedaling on a bicycle wheel, doesn't mean that they can't get the work done. But often, if our interpretation is that that's bad or that's less worthy as a
Yeah.
student for learning. So I think we have to be a bit more flexible.
Yeah. Success looks very different to every student. So we have to find out how to achieve success for each individual student.
Yeah, I remember I had a student that would literally, when I had carpet time, he would literally pace back and
Yeah.
forth behind the carpet, and he would just walk, and he would be like, he'd put up his hand and he'd be totally paying attention, but he would
Yeah.
pace. And he would struggle a lot when he had other teachers that would come in because they didn't understand why he would just start getting up and wandering around the room as the
Yeah.
lesson was happening. I think if I didn't understand that success for him looked different than success for, the sweet little girl that would sit at my feet and play with my shoelaces, then he would have had a much more difficult time being successful in the classroom. So
Mhm.
I think sometimes even reframing that
Yes.
these are all okay things that we can let happen in our classroom, and it doesn't mean that we don't have classroom management or
Yeah.
that we don't have, like, we're not successful or
You're not a
good
bad
teachers.
teacher. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
For
you're not a
allowing
bad
students
teacher
to, yeah.
because kids are doing differently, and or sitting on the floor with a clipboard. Like, at the end of the day, if we just want the work done, does it matter how they do it?
Yeah. I had a student when I taught self-contained who I had all of my other students were out in their other classes. So self-contained mean they're in my classroom all day. They go out for specials and they go
Okay.
out into the general ed classroom, mostly for social experiences to be with their same aged peers. So all of my other kids, there were 4 of them, and he was my 5th student. And it was just him and I at the end of the day, and he would work hard all day. And then at the end of the day, he would crash and he would need to take like a 15-20 minute nap. And that was the end of his day. And like admin would come in and other teachers would come in and he'd just be chilling, sleeping on the floor somewhere. And I'm like, he's fine. We got all of our work done. Like, this is his reward for completing all of his work today. And that was just how it was. That was his success. That was how he best succeeded.
Yeah, redefining what success looks like, not based on the kids. I guess what
Yeah.
success looks like for them, not necessarily what kind of interpreting what learning looks like based on perhaps our own experiences as learners,
Yeah.
because we're probably teachers because we liked school, or we liked, like, I don't know, I liked playing school. I was pretty good
Yeah.
at being a student. So like learning looked a lot different for me than it does for a lot of my students. And I think what are some of the ways, because there's a lot of times where our special education students get stigmatized
Yeah.
as these, that bike chair is just for him because he's got special needs, or he's special
Yeah.
ed, or they're pulled out. How do you avoid, or how do you get to the point where you can help your students fight that stigma, or help your other students that might not have special education needs not think, oh, the assistive tech is only for him because, he's special ed? Because that
Yeah.
hurts my heart to think about. But what are some of the
Well,
strategies that you have?
yeah, so this was actually something that happened that I had to deal with when I taught. This is my first year teaching. I was a 7th grade co-teacher, so all of my kids were in inclusion. They were in the general ed classroom all day, and I would go in and help them throughout the day and travel with them to different classes. And I remember admin coming up to me one day, and I loved him to death. He was just like, we need to do something about, just the stigma of special ed, and some of the kids are getting bullied, blah, blah, blah. What can we do? So what I did was, there's this activity that you can do, and we've all seen that picture on social media where there's 3 kids at the fence, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
one kid can see because he's tall enough to see over it. And then the other kid, he's a little bit taller, so maybe he just stands on his tippy toes or something. And then there's the little kid who needs a box, or he needs to sit on a ladder or a chair. So you can do that activity kind of in your classroom. And what I did was I did it on the whiteboard. Actually, I think it was a smart board. And I'm short. So I tried to draw something at the top of the board, and I was like, I can't reach it. And I had all of the students come and try and reach that, like a spot on the board, and see how. And some of these seventh graders are like 6 feet tall already. I'm
Yeah.
like, my goodness, y'all. So then we had the conversation of like, well, how can I reach the top then? Like my legs aren't going to grow anymore. I can wear high heels, but like that's uncomfortable. That doesn't work for me. That's not going to make me successful. So what else can we try? So then we would brainstorm different things. And then we kind of turned it into, well, some of your peers sometimes need different things to help them succeed in school. And it's kind of the same thing.
And I think it's so important to have those conversations.
Yeah.
I love reading Fish in a Tree and Wonder, especially for this age group, because it really helps. My favorite part about those books is, number one, it helps my students that perhaps have difficulty with reading or
Mhm.
have disabilities see that, they can kind of see themselves sometimes reflected. It's meaningful for
Yeah.
them. And it opens up the minds of the rest of my students to kind of see, like, oh, there is like a person, because there's so many times where students just won't say, or they don't want to disclose that,
Yeah.
they have, they struggle with math. There's an intellectual disability that is preventing them from being successful with, memorizing their multiplication times tables. So they
Yeah.
need help with a calculator, and or they need help with other things, and they just don't want to say to people, like, this is an area that I am struggling with and I
Yeah.
need assistance, and you don't. So I'm using a calculator because it's what I need, but you don't need the calculator. So,
Right.
like, don't judge me for
Yeah.
pulling that calculator out. And I think I love those books as a way to, and I think that's something I know for me, I'm driven by that, is I want to hide them in plain sight. Sometimes I know if so, people that have listened to like previous episodes, I always like to hide my special ed students in plain sight so that they don't look different from every other student in my
Yeah.
classroom. That, you know, anybody, it's not just the special ed students that can stand when they're
Yeah.
working, anyone can stand when they're working,
Right.
and anyone can use a clipboard, or we have fidget toys and stuff, that it's really for everyone, but also some people need it. So
Yeah.
understanding that difference, I think,
And I think
is,
books are, like you said, you read books with your class. I mean, you can read chapter books with your class in elementary. You can read picture books. You can read picture books in high school. Like, books are a great way to start a conversation. And I mean, there are books out there with the main characters who have autism and who have Down syndrome, who have ADHD, who wear a patch over their eye, who have an auditory issue. Like, there's books for everything. So if you have a student and you want to teach your class more about them, definitely look on the internet for different books and start the conversation there.
yeah, I think it's an easy way. It's an easy segue, instead of being like, hey, Johnny, do you want to tell us about, like, I would never do that, but we don't
Yeah.
want to necessarily center them out, but we still want to have that conversation. So I think it's easy to talk about a character in a book. Plus,
Yeah.
we can also double dip there, everyone. Like, we can cover
100%.
language expectations and do a good job
Yeah.
with our students. So I think there's that too. So then the next question comes with, okay, so we've got all of the accommodations, we've got
Hmm.
the modifications in place, we have set up the environment of our classroom so that it is, with universal design, and that we've got all of these things going. How do we assess?
Oh man, this is a loaded question.
I know. I'm sorry.
It really depends on what you're trying to assess. So for me, whether I'm in, a gen ed classroom doing inclusion, or I'm co-teaching, or I'm doing resource pull out, where you pull kids out during the day and go back to another room, or you have a self-contained classroom, I live by sticky note data. So I actually have a blank sticky note here on my laptop. I keep sticky notes with me all the time because I can quick jot down, like if I'm walking around with like while students are working, I can write down students' initials, and then as they're working, like tally how they're doing, and then come back around and see what they got correct or incorrect, and keep it on a sticky note, and then go put that somewhere. I keep it in like a data ring. I should have grabbed one, but a data ring where all of their data is in one place. But then sometimes you actually need a data sheet, like for certain behaviors, if you're tracking the frequency of a behavior, how often a child is getting up out of their seat to do XYZ, or how long they're up out of their seat. That's something that you need a specific data sheet for. But yeah, it really depends on the situation, and it depends on your classroom and what is easiest for you. But for me, this using sticky notes for taking data is like, you can literally do it in any classroom at any time of the day, anywhere in the school or community. If you're going on field trips, like, it's just the easiest thing to take data on with.
So is a data ring like one of those binder rings that you?
Yep. So it's basically where it came from was so we have to write progress reports on the IEPs. And now I wish I would have grabbed one. But it's like a note card basically, but it's a template that you type into, and it's free in my TPT shop if you want to check it out. But you type one IEP goal per note card basically, and you print it out and you put it on a binder ring. So you literally have a student's all of their mastery, all of their IEP goals, you have all of their data on these binder rings. So like if a parent comes in, we know it happens, and they're like, I need to see data on my child, and I want to see how they're doing. You can literally just pull out the binder ring and be like, here's how we're doing with this. Here's how often we've collected all of this data. And then it's great for report cards, because we all do report cards at home, right? There's never enough time in the day. You just take all your binder rings home with you. You don't have to take a notebook. You don't have to take the sticky notes. You don't have to take like binders or a huge bag. You just take the binder rings and you can just type in student performed this IEP goal with these trials or this trial data, however you want to word it. And you type in the data that you would take in on the sticky notes.
Why didn't I know about this? So I'm thinking like I had in my last classroom, I had 11 to 13. I can't remember if it was 11 or 13 students that had special education needs, all on IEPs. And I'm just thinking, if I had a binder ring for each student, number one, it would at least, if I had their goals or what they were accommodated for and what they were modified for, I could at least pull that out and be like, oh, right, okay, so I'm looking for like this thing, and I'm looking for this, like, this is how they're different. Like, I can memorize like the grade 5 look fors because that's what I'm planning generally. But then I have to remember, okay, Sally she's modified at grade level, but doesn't have to do this, or like you can pull it. And it's a lot easier than pulling a binder, because I had it all just sitting in a binder.
Yeah, so I need to share this with you then, because it's going to blow your mind too. So I did a teacher chat with my friend Megan last week, the week before. It's on my YouTube channel, but you can check it out. And it's a freebie in her shop. And it's a modification of the binder rings that I have. And basically, it's a one sheet of paper. So I'm just going to pretend that this is the piece of paper. And she has all of her students' names here. And then across the top are all of the accommodations that her students have. And she literally check boxes. So she's like, okay, Patty needs comprehension, check. Stephanie needs comprehension, check. So if she's doing an English lesson and maybe somebody needs something read aloud, she can look and say, okay, who needs read aloud? And she can be like, all right, Stephanie, Patty, Jackson, Zoe, you all come with me. We're going to go do a read aloud at the back table. The rest of you you read it yourself, or however you want to word it. But it was all on one sheet of paper, all of the accommodations. And I was like, where have you been all my life?
Yeah, because I literally try to memorize it in my head. Like, okay, for math, I need to pull for math because there's like 1.5 million different math strands that we need to teach. And it's like, okay, well, some of them are modified just for number sense. Some of them are modified just for reading. Some of them are modified just for writing. But if you had it, you'd be like, okay, here. And then that would be great for all your specials teachers to be like, here's my page. Or your OT, your supply teachers that are coming in. Yeah, here's the accommodations. Here's what they're allowed. Here's what they're not. Like, all in one snapshot page, so you don't have to keep it all.
You blew my mind
in your head.
I know.
See, you're blowing my mind now. I'm like, okay, all right. So we're writing all of these down, and I'm sure you can include, like, we have tons of ESL students, so you can include that as well at the bottom. You can include your ESL students all on that page, so that you can remember what you wrote on that IEP in September now, because we write the IEPs in September, we touch base on them throughout the year, but when you're going to write report cards in June and you're like, oh, right, what was he modified for? You have that. And then if the data rings
literally on one sheet of paper, one sheet.
Yeah. And so if you had that one sheet and then you had a data ring, you could literally like grab it and you actually have the data tracked. I mean, you could have data rings for every single student in your class, But
You could, yeah.
I would think you might want to, just for the IEP students, because they're more complex.
Yeah.
There's
And
more comings and goings with all of that.
yeah. And so, well, my friend Megan, she works in resource. She's done resource. I think she's in resource right now. And that's what she does. She actually took the binder rings and put it on one full sheet. I'll send you the link so you can put it here.
Yeah.
Because it's
I will totally put it there.
yeah. So
for both of you, and your link to your YouTube video too.
yeah. So she modified it to where it's not on like a note card type of thing. It's one sheet of paper. And all of her goals are on the side, and then she can put in the data across, and then she has her other one sheet that has all the accommodations check marked off for each of her kids. And I was just like, where have you been all my life? Like,
right? Like it's so simple. And I'm sure we have, like, we probably have been, I'm always given the stack of IEPs. So I don't write them typically. Normally it's my special education teacher that writes them from my input, but then she hands me a stack of IEPs and I hole punch them, shove them in my binder. And then, but they're like 8 pages long.
Oh, they're longer in space in some places.
Yeah. So
like 40,
if you could summarize them all to be like, okay, here's the strands they're modified for, what grade level, what are the expectations, what are their goals?
Yep.
That would make, I think that would make and then you have to do it once or maybe twice as terms, as you do a second one for term 2, but you'd have to do it 2 times a year. And then it would make meeting their learning goals so much easier because you wouldn't be relying on your memorization skills.
Right. And that's called an IEP snapshot. So 1 page, here's the goals, like what we're working on, here's the accommodations, here's the service times, here's like if they go to OT, PT, or speech, here's when, all of this other information, it's on one sheet. And then you could have your data sheet as another page, and then your accommodations check boxes on it. And it's literally 3 sheets of paper, and everything is on it.
Yeah, and you just keep it with you at all times, like everywhere you go. You keep it everywhere you go because it pops up all the time.
Yeah.
And it helps because there's so many times where I will admit it, there's so many times where I'm like, oh, right. Oh, right. He's on an IEP for this, so he really should not be doing it. Or I've had students that I've just forgotten because they are so, like, they're strong, but they still need some accommodations in certain areas. And you're like, oh, right. Yeah, that should have been like easier. Or I should have done something different. But like, there are some kids that are super capable, but they do have some needs, and sometimes it slips your mind or you forget about it when you're in the middle of a lesson. Or even if you're lesson planning, you can remember who needs what because you've got that page that simply summarizes your entire class all at once. So totally love that. Thank you. and I'll have to shout out to Megan.
Yes.
Too, for that. We'll have to link to that too, because like that's awesome for people to accommodate and to mark assessments, because it is different. And it's not simply just a matter of being like, oh, they're on an IEP, so they always get a B.
Yeah.
Like,
well, the plan is for them to not have an IEP forever. Some students will, but the goal is to get them back to grade level so that they don't need these extra supports.
Yeah. And they can't do that if we just simplify everything and give them a B. Because it's not really going to help get them. We have to try to remove barriers, right? We're removing the barriers that are getting in their way through the IEP. That's the point of it. So I think anything we can do, and I loved all the suggestions that you helped to provide with my like fake scenario kids. to think through what success looks like, what your classroom looks like, how we can remove those barriers in our classroom so that it can work, so the kids can just work. And it doesn't always have to be, you have to plan one lesson for 80% of your group, and then you plan a completely separate lesson for 20% of your class. It doesn't always have to be like that. They can access when we remove some of that barrier.
Yes.
So I love it. Can you tell us a little bit more about your intentional IEP?
Yeah, so the intentional IEP was something that I started last year. So I've been out of the traditional classroom setting for, oh my gosh, 3 or 4 years now. And I've always loved writing IEPs. Like,
I think
I'm
you
the
might be the only
weirdo.
one.
Yeah, I'm the weirdo that loves data. I'm a data nerd. I love writing IEPs. I love the paperwork. I love organizing it all. I love everything about it. And I was like, I've got to do something with this because I know so many special education teachers despise writing IEPs. Like it's so much paperwork.
Hmm.
So I was like, I need to do something with this. And that's where the intentional IEP came from. So it is, it is like basically an IEP goal bank. So teachers can go and search and find IEP goals for their students. But then this summer, we're actually hosting the summer PD series, and we're just doing, I'm chatting like this with a bunch of other special education teachers, and we're talking about everything IEPs, like behaviors, parent meetings, IEP meetings, writing the IEPs, different sections of the IEPs, like everything. And it is just, it lights my soul on fire because I want everyone to be as excited about writing IEPs as I am.
I don't know if many teachers are going to look at that and be like, I don't know if that's the most exciting part of my day. As I know,
No.
as a
And
lot more teachers, so there was here where it was really the resource teacher that was writing the IEP, but
yeah,
now it's starting to move into classroom teachers because we're the ones implementing it.
really.
So we're writing our IEPs. So I would say probably,
Wow.
although I was able to escape it, I had some very lovely special education teachers that just took that role on. I know that a
Yeah.
lot of teachers are now writing all of the report cards, but they're also writing all of their own IEPs and have
Mhm.
no idea where to start. So, in
Wow.
looking at, although some of the terminology might be different
Right.
between the countries, um, we have all the same components. When you look up all the
Yes.
same components of an IP, we have goals, we have accommodations, we have
Yes.
modifications, we have all of the same services our kids get. They all get OT and
Mhm.
PT. But I think that this is, if we have teachers that are like staring at their IEP documents going like, I don't know, what would a goal be? What would their goal
And
be?
it's
I don't know what a
it's
goal could
not
be.
even like gen ed teachers. So myself, like when I went to college, I was never taught how to write an IEP.
Mm.
Nobody in college taught me how to write an IEP. Nobody in any of the 7 schools that I had worked for ever taught me how to write an IEP. I had an amazing mentor my first year teaching, and she helped me with it. And then I just kind of learned through experience what works, what doesn't work. That was a terrible IEP. I need to do better. And I've always loved it though. So I want to be, I will help you. Let me help you write IEPs because I geek out over it. So let me geek out over it while I help you learn how to do it. So then in turn, it doesn't take you as long to do it.
And you have different goals and like different types of accommodations
Mm-hmm.
suggested. So instead of trying to like figure out what possible accommodations could be, you literally have like a bank of, here are some possible accommodations that you could pick from.
You have IEP goals, and then you have the IEP toolkit, and that has a list of like 340 accommodations, and then there's a list of modifications as well. And it really just depends on the IEP goal and what the child needs as to what accommodations you're going to pick to go along with it.
That's amazing. That makes it so much easier than literally staring at a blank document.
Yeah, and
And
you're
even
like,
if we have, yeah, pretty much every single time. And also making sure that you're picking, as the teacher, we have, what we put on the IEP, we have to do. So we
yeah,
also need to make sure that what is put on there is actually reasonable for our own limits and our
right.
own, like if we say we're going to, set a timer every 5 minutes and, ding, and then there's going to be something that happens, like in a regular classroom, that might not, it might work for that student, but we might not be able to actually do that. So then that
Yeah,
could come back and bite us if we put
yeah.
something on that IEP that we know isn't going to be realistic because it doesn't really fit our style. It would never fit my style. But I'm sure there's other things that would work just as well that would
Yeah,
also fit with that teacher and that teacher's style.
yeah.
And
You have to, at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for the student. And you have to provide the student with services and everything to get them to succeed. And that looks very different. Like we said at the beginning, it looks very different student to student. So what works for one might not work for another. And it really is about knowing about the kid and using the IEP team to come together and come up with different ideas. And it's not a copy and paste thing. Like you actually have to think about it. And when you put it in that IEP, it's not a suggestion. Like you actually have to do it. You have to follow it. It's a legal document.
Yeah. Yeah. So picking them and knowing what's going to work for that student and what you are going to be able to do, and knowing that there's different options. So I think sometimes we get stuck too with knowing like, okay, well, everyone gets a fidget toy. Well,
Yeah.
fidget toys are great, but they don't always work for every
Right.
student. And
Well,
the
and you have
loud
so
fidget
many
toys
different
don't work
types.
for some. Yeah.
There's so many different types of fidget toys. Like you have
Mm-hmm.
the spinner, you have ones that click, you have stretchy things, you have like so many options. So when you say fidget toy, like you could have a class of 25 kids and have 25 different fidgets.
Oh, I think I would have. No. No,
Yeah.
I don't think I would want that. But there's different ones that are like quieter, and
Yeah.
there's different strategies that work for some but don't work for others, and some that
Yeah.
are really just a distraction, not a fidget. And knowing the
Right.
difference between what's going to just distract them and prevent them from being successful, and what is
Right.
just enough to keep their attention, but not enough to be a complete and total distraction for them.
Right. And that's trial and error with anything, right? So, I mean, if something doesn't work, the IEP isn't set in stone. You can amend it at any time. You can make changes at any time. So, if you
Mm-hmm.
say the student's going to use a fidget spinner and, 6 weeks down the road, this kid is just chucking it at other kids' faces because he doesn't want to work, like, been there.
Yep.
You need to go back to the IEP team and be like, we can't use a fidget spinner. We need to try something else.
Yeah.
So,
And
knowing that
knowing
you
that it
can change it
is,
any time. Yeah.
it's modifiable. Like you can change it. It's a growing document that, and
Yes.
if you notice that your goals were maybe lower than what the student was originally, what you thought they could do, maybe they can do actually 7 minutes instead of 10 minutes, and
Yeah.
5 minutes is too easy. Go in and modify it and up the
Yes.
goal and change the goal as to what they're working on. And I think
Yes.
that
You can do
is,
that at any time. But you
yeah.
have to make sure you have approval from the IEP team. Don't just like go do it because that's illegal.
Yeah, yeah. Actually discuss it and follow all of the
Yes.
rules. Like,
Yes.
otherwise,
The
you're just going to
parents'
be like
approval.
modifying right before the report card and be like, no, 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 that's not how this works. It has
Yeah,
to be
no,
done
don't do
ahead
that.
of time.
Please follow the appropriate steps to amend an IEP and IEP goals and accommodations and everything because just don't. Just follow the
So,
rules.
yeah, it sounds like you're speaking a little bit from experience there for sure.
Yeah, I've read horror stories and heard horror stories about it, and I
Yeah.
don't know why anyone would do it, but it's been done before. I don't know why, but
I don't know. I don't know either. But definitely, if you don't know, ask the resource teacher who is the expert. Rely on the team. Figure out who is there that can help support you. You are not, even though sometimes it definitely feels, especially if we're not given the supports like an EA or a paraprofessional in the classroom to help support us. Sometimes it does feel like we're all alone, but we can ask for help. There are
yes.
probably people there that are ready and waiting to help you if you just ask for their support. That they
And
probably will.
I will help you do anything. I can't read your mind though. So if you don't tell me that you need help or what specifically you need help with, just ask for it. It doesn't mean you're a terrible teacher. It doesn't mean you're a failure as a teacher. It just means you need help. And we all need help sometimes. Like I will be the first one to go ask for help if I don't know something because somebody else knows how to do it better. I know what I know, but I don't know what I don't know. Somebody else
Mm-hmm.
does though, and they can help me get there to help that child.
Absolutely. Absolutely. See, like me getting to talk to you today about all of your ideas and expertise. I super appreciate the fact that you agreed to come on the show and talk to me and to all of the viewers and listeners out there about your wealth of experience at working with students with complex needs and coming up with some easy ways that we can track our data and write our IEPs and help to accommodate, because really our goal should be to reach those students and meet their needs so that they too can be successful in our classrooms. I think
Yes,
that
of
really should be
course.
the goal.
Thank you so much for having me. I could talk about IEPs all day long. So
I will be honest, I am not on the I love IEP bandwagon. It is not
I'm
my
on it
favorite
enough
place
for
to
both of
be.
us.
Yeah,
I'm on it
it's
enough for both of us.
yeah, it's definitely not my favorite place to be. Throwing up like some flexible seating and getting super creative, I'm all for that, but I could skip the IEP writing any day of the week.
Well, I'm your girl. So hit
Perfect.
me up. I
There
will
we
help
go.
you through all of it. Yeah. So
Yay.
just I'm here.
See, there are people that love doing it. There are people,
Yeah, there
find the
are.
people that it's their zone of genius and rely on them and ask
Yes.
them for help and advice and support, because it
Yes.
works.
And I love that you worded it that way. Zone of genius.
It's
Yes.
mine. It seems to be my buzzword recently.
I
I
love
keep
it.
saying it in different in different ways, that, like, we have our zones, we have our
Yeah.
areas where we excel, and then we have areas where we just are not so hot and not so good.
Yeah.
And it's okay to be like, I'm not good at this, help me.
Yeah. Oh, I
So
love that. Zone of genius.
yeah,
Yeah.
I keep saying it over and over again. I don't know
You
why,
need to
but
coin it. Like that is it for you.
I don't think
Game
it's mine,
over.
but and I go through these periods where these buzz phrases where it just seems to be like, this is where I'm focusing right now. So
Yeah, I love
it's right now it's zone of genius. That's
it. I like
where
it.
that's where I'm living, that's the phrase these days. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I can't wait to talk more about this another time, perhaps, about different things. And we will put all of the links in the show notes, and you will have access to all of the things that Stephanie talked about, those data rings, that even will get the data links, as well as your YouTube video on that, and links to the intentional IEP, which will be super exciting for teachers that are staring straight at the face of having to now write their IEPs and have no idea where to start. So thank you so much for that, and really appreciate it. Thanks for
Yes,
coming.
thank you so much for having me.